The message came just before sunrise, buzzing on Daniel's phone while the city outside was still quiet. He reached for it without thinking, expecting nothing more than a work alert or a missed call. Instead, a single line stared back at him, short and cold, written by someone he trusted most. "I'm sorry you had to find out this way." His sleep vanished in an instant. Daniel sat up in bed, the sheets sliding to his waist. Beside him, Myra slept peacefully, unaware that their world was about to tilt. Daniel's eyes burned as he opened the attached file, numbers, signatures, dates. At first, it didn't make sense. Then it did. The company, his company. The one he had built from nothing with long nights, borrowed money, and blind faith. His name was barely there. Ownership gone, control erased. His hands shook, but he didn't wake Myra. He stared at the screen, breathing slow, forcing himself not to panic. This had to be a mistake, a draft, a misunderstanding. But deep down, he already knew the truth. The signatures were real. The transfers complete. Someone had planned this carefully. That someone was Aaron. Aaron wasn't just a business partner. He was family in every way that mattered. They met years ago, young and desperate, both chasing success with more hope than skill. They failed together before they succeeded. They celebrated small wins with cheap food and big dreams. When Daniel doubted himself, Aaron pushed him forward. When Aaron lost direction, Daniel pulled him back. The company was born from that bond. It's men against the world, promising each other loyalty above all else. Daniel swung his legs off the bed and stood. The room felt smaller now, as if the walls were closing in. He walked to the window and watched the first light touch the buildings. Somewhere in the city, people were waking up to normal lives. Daniel felt like he was standing outside of his own. He searched his phone, scrolling through messages from Aaron. Friendly updates, casual jokes. A dinner invite from last week that Daniel had postponed because of work. Every word now felt false. Every smile remembered felt rehearsed. By morning, Daniel was at his desk, still in yesterday's clothes. He hadn't slept again. He called the company lawyer first, then another. Each conversation made the truth heavier. The transfers were legal. The board had approved everything. Daniel had been outvoted, outplayed, and quietly removed. When he asked why no one told him, there was silence, then excuses, then sympathy that felt hollow. Around noon, Aaron finally called. Daniel watched the phone ring. He didn't answer right away. When he did, his voice surprised him, calm, controlled. Aaron spoke smoothly, as if this were just another meeting. He explained his reasons: growth, vision, survival. He said Daniel had changed, said he was holding the company back with doubt. And emotion said it wasn't personal. That hurt more than anger ever could. Daniel didn't shout. He listened. Each word pressed deeper into his chest. When the call ended, there was nothing left to say. The friendship, as he knew it, was over. He left the office and walked without direction. The city noise wrapped around him, loud and uncaring. Every place held a memory. Coffee shops where plans were drawn on napkins. Streets where they argued about ideas and laughed minutes later. Those memories felt like they belonged to someone else now. When Daniel reached home, Mira was waiting. She saw his face and knew something was wrong. He tried to speak, but the words stuck. When he finally told her, her eyes widened, then softened. She didn't interrupt, she didn't judge. She just listened. That night, after Mira fell asleep, Daniel stayed awake. His mind replayed everything, again and again. The signs he missed. The meetings he trusted Aaron to handle. The faith he gave without question. The betrayal wasn't just about money or power. It was about trust. About believing in someone who had decided you were no longer needed. As the hours passed, Daniel's shock began to change. The sadness hardened. The confusion sharpened. Something new took shape, slow but steady. A question formed in his mind, clear and dangerous. Why should Aaron walk away untouched? Daniel thought about fairness, about balance, about how easy it had been for Aaron to justify his actions. If the world rewarded betrayal, then maybe betrayal needed an answer. He didn't think of revenge as anger at first. He thought of it as correction. It's restoring what had been taken. He told himself it was reasonable. When dawn came again, Daniel hadn't slept. His reflection in the mirror looked older, tighter, but his eyes were clear, focused. The betrayal had drawn a line. On one side was the man who trusted without fear. On the other was the man who now understood the cost of loyalty. Daniel didn't yet know what he would do. He only knew one thing for certain. What Aaron had started would not end quietly. Daniel's anger didn't fade with time. It grew quiet but insistent, like a fire smoldering under dry leaves. Every morning, he woke thinking of Aaron, replaying the betrayal in vivid detail. He remembered the handshake that had once sealed their partnership, the plans drawn in coffee-stained notebooks, the late-night talks filled with dreams that now felt like lies. Aaron had stripped him of everything, and the thought refused to leave him alone. But as the rage burned, Daniel realized that simply reacting wouldn't be enough. He needed control, strategy, precision. He returned to the office, but it no longer felt like his space. The walls seemed taller, the desks emptier, the air colder. Aaron had changed the environment, subtly new faces in meetings, a shift in tone, a quiet exclusion of Daniel from decisions he once made. Each small adjustment reminded Daniel of what he had lost. The humiliation cut deeper than he expected. And yet there was a spark of clarity in the pain. He understood the board, understood the rules, and most importantly, he understood Aaron better than anyone else could. That knowledge became his tool. By the end of the first week, Daniel had begun to map a plan in his mind. Not a reckless attack, not a public scandal that would ruin both of them, but a careful, deliberate course. He revisited old contracts, reviewed confidential emails, and traced weaknesses in the company's structure. He noticed minor errors Aaron had made in rushing deals, miscommunications that, if highlighted, could reveal flaws in Aaron's management. Every detail became a thread he could pull, a lever for leverage. He didn't speak to anyone yet. He worked alone, in silence, because he knew the moment he shared his thoughts, his purpose would be diluted, distorted, or worse, exposed. At night, Daniel sat in the dim light of his apartment, a single lamp illuminating stacks of folders. He made notes, wrote scenarios, and imagined outcomes. Karen exposed, his mistakes revealed, the company forced to reconsider its decisions. The thought gave Daniel a strange sense of satisfaction. But satisfaction was fleeting. Every imagined victory came with consequences. He couldn't ignore employees affected, reputations damaged, families hurt. That nagging voice inside him whispered constantly, "Is this really worth it?" Even Mira noticed the change. She asked questions, gently at first. "You seem distant," she said one evening. "You're working too hard. Something's bothering you?" Daniel wanted to tell her everything, to share the depths of the betrayal's sting, and his plans. But he stayed silent. This was his alone. He couldn't allow her concern, her love, to cloud his judgment. The burden of revenge was a private weight. As days turned into weeks, Daniel's emotional struggle intensified. He found himself caught between two conflicting urges. One side of him craved justice, the satisfaction of seeing Aaron humbled. The other side hesitated, warning him that revenge rarely ended well, that it often destroyed more than it fixed. He remembered past warnings from friends, stories of people who had sought retribution only to lose themselves in the process. Yet he also remembered the sheer injustice he felt, the betrayal that had upended his life. His thoughts became a battlefield. Aaron, meanwhile, continued his work. Oblivious to the storm building in Daniel's mind, or perhaps he sensed it and chose to ignore it. He sent messages, emails, invitations to meetings that no longer mattered. To Daniel, he spoke politely, rationally, almost kindly, as if the betrayal hadn't occurred. In Aaron's mind, nothing was wrong. The decision had been necessary, logical. He believed he had acted for the good of the company, for growth, for success. That belief, Daniel realized, made him even more dangerous. Aaron wasn't a villain in the traditional sense. He was a man acting out of his own perceived morality, a man convinced he was right. This realization shook Daniel. It meant his revenge couldn't be about punishment alone. It had to be precise, controlled, meaningful. It couldn't just be an emotional outburst. It had to accomplish something tangible without destroying what he still valued himself, his integrity, his future. The weight of this responsibility pressed heavily on him. He felt the complexity of morality in a way he hadn't before. Betrayal wasn't black and white. Revenge wasn't a single act. It was a series of choices, each carrying consequences he had to anticipate. Daniel began to test scenarios quietly. He reached out to old colleagues, people he had trusted for years. He asked neutral questions, observed reactions, and noted vulnerabilities. He discovered that some partners were already unhappy with Aaron's decisions. Small mistakes were festering beneath the surface, unnoticed, uncorrected. Daniel realized that the opportunity for leverage existed, but only if he acted carefully. Timing, precision, and patience would be everything. Yet with each calculated step, doubt crept in. Daniel wondered if he had already changed into someone he wouldn't recognize. The thought of destroying Aaron's credibility even slightly gnawed at him. He remembered moments from the past, the laughter, the shared dreams, the unwavering support Aaron had once given. Could he reconcile that memory with the man who had betrayed him? Could he separate the betrayal from the bond they once had? These questions tormented him. The line between justice and obsession blurred. The internal struggle was constant. Every night, Daniel imagined Aaron confronting consequences. He saw Aaron's confident facade crumble, his excuses fail, his justifications unravel. Daniel felt a surge of satisfaction each time, but it was immediately followed by guilt. He imagined the ripple effects: employees questioning leadership, families affected, friendships strained. This duality of emotion, pleasure, and guilt kept him awake long into the night. Sleep became elusive, replaced by a restless planning. That consumed him entirely. Daniel's obsession with precision also made him meticulous in small ways. He documented everything. Emails, meetings, minor errors, casual remarks were recorded for later use. He didn't allow emotion to dictate action. Every move had to serve a purpose. If he acted too soon, it could backfire. If he hesitated too long, the opportunity might vanish. He walked a delicate line, balancing the desire for justice with the need for restraint. During this period, Daniel's interactions with others became measured. He no longer joked freely with friends. Conversations were brief, carefully curated. Mira noticed, occasionally pressing him gently about his mood. Daniel reassured her with vague words, but she could sense the tension behind his calm exterior. The isolation weighed on him, but he accepted it. Revenge, he told himself, was a solitary path. Sharing it would dilute its power. He also began examining himself in ways he hadn't before. Was his desire for revenge purely about Aaron, or was It'lbow reclaiming his own sense of control? Did he want justice, or did he crave validation? These questions didn't have clear answers, but he realized they were critical. Understanding his own motives was as important as understanding Aaron's. Weaknesses? Without clarity, any action could spiral out of control, leaving him morally compromised, achieving nothing meaningful. The tension grew daily. Daniel noticed subtle changes in Aaron's behavior, to confidence bordering on arrogance, small oversteps, a dismissive tone toward long-term employees. These details, once overlooked, became evidence for potential leverage. Daniel felt a grim satisfaction in noticing them, a reminder that knowledge could be power. But he also recognized the danger. His obsession could blind him to the cost of acting. Every strategy, every plan carried a moral price. Despite the careful planning, Daniel's emotions remained raw. Anger and betrayal were constant companions. Even mundane things triggered them: a laugh, a phrase, a casual mention of the company. Each reminder reinforced his sense of injustice, but also fueled the careful deliberation that defined his new approach. He understood that acting impulsively would ruin everything. Strategy had to outweigh emotion, even if emotion was the fuel driving him forward. Weeks turned into months, and Daniel's preparation became a daily ritual. Every morning began with analysis, every evening with reflection. His world had narrowed to the contours of his plan, the weaknesses he could exploit, and the moral choices he had to navigate. He grew sharper, more aware, more focused, but also more distant from those who once mattered. The isolation, the tension, and the emotional struggle became his constant companions. Through all of this, Daniel realized that revenge was not just about punishing Aaron, it was about proving something to himself. Could he maintain control, morality, and integrity while seeking justice? Could he act decisively without losing the man he wanted to be? These questions became the crucible in which his strategy and self-identity were tested. Every decision was weighted with consequence. Every thought measured against both opportunity and ethics. By the end of this period, Donald had built a mental map of his plan, a strategy that was both precise and adaptable. He knew the moments to strike, the leverage points, and the ethical boundaries he wouldn't cross. But the most difficult realization remained. The act of revenge, when it came, would not erase the pain or be. Daniel sat alone in his office late at night, the city lights spilling through the blinds, casting long shadows across the floor. The apartment was quiet, almost eerily so, and yet the tension inside him felt louder than any noise outside. His laptop glowed on the desk, open to a draft email that he had been working on for weeks. One click and it would expose Aaron's mistakes, shake the company, and force everyone to see the betrayal in its full weight. Daniel's finger hovered over the mouse, trembling slightly, not from fear but from the magnitude of the choice. Before him, he thought back to the past months, the planning, the observation, the nights spent mapping Aaron's weaknesses. Each small misstep, each overlooked detail had been recorded, analyzed, and considered. Every scenario had been played out in his mind. He had imagined the board's reaction, the employees' shock, Aaron's panic, and the satisfaction that might follow. It was tempting, intoxicating even, but Daniel also knew the cost. The moment he sent the email, there would be no turning back. The company might survive, it might collapse, but either way, the damage would ripple far beyond him and Aaron. Daniel closed his eyes and breathed deeply. The anger that had driven him for months was still there, hot and sharp, but beneath it was a quieter voice, one that reminded him who he truly was. That voice spoke of integrity, of patience, of morality. It asked him to consider whether destroying Aaron, even just in part, would actually make him feel whole, or whether it would only leave him empty, hollow and bitter. The irony wasn't lost on him. Months ago, he had been consumed by the betrayal, believing that action revenge would heal him. Now, after careful planning and observation, he realized that the act itself could be just another chain, tying him to anger and resentment for years to come. He thought about Myra, about the life they had tried to build together, about the quiet peace that had existed before this storm. Could he live with himself afterward, even if Aaron suffered the consequences he had long imagined? Daniel's thoughts. Drifted to Aaron, he wasn't a villain in the classic sense. He was a man acting out of what he believed was right, convinced he was protecting the company and its future. That understanding made the decision even harder. This wasn't about punishing a criminal. This was about punishing someone who once was his friend, who had walked beside him for years, whose mistakes were now intertwined with their shared history. The complexity of that truth made Daniel hesitate. It made every possible action feel heavier. Hours passed. Daniel leaned back in his chair, watching the city move outside the window. He thought of the employees who depended on the company, the people whose lives would be affected if chaos erupted. He considered the families, the investors, the partners. One wrong move, one click too early, and innocent people could be hurt. The morality of revenge became a living thing in his mind, and he could feel it pressing down on him with the weight of inevitability. His laptop screen reflected his face, tired and tense. He reopened the email draft and read it again, line by line, each sentence cold and precise. Every detail was accurate, verifiable, undeniable. It was perfect in execution, ruthless in its logic. But Daniel felt no joy, only a tight, twisting sensation in his chest. He had spent weeks preparing, and yet the moment of truth didn't feel triumphant. It felt terrifying. The power was there, but it came with a price he wasn't sure he wanted to pay. Daniel stood and paced the room. He thought about what Aaron had once meant to him: the friendship, the trust, the shared dreams. They had been inseparable at one point. To destroy him now, even partially, would erase more than just a business victory. It would erase years of connection and perhaps the part of Daniel that had trusted in people, that had believed in loyalty and honor. Could he sacrifice that part of himself just to prove a point? The thought of inaction was equally agonizing. Doing nothing felt like letting Aaron win, like accepting the betrayal without a fight. That idea made his fists clench, made his heart pound. He wrestled with himself, imagining both futures, one in which he struck back and felt a fleeting triumph, and one in which he stepped away, preserving his own integrity but leaving the betrayal unresolved. Each scenario carried consequences, both internal and external. And Daniel realized that no decision would be simple. He returned to the chair and sat heavily, staring at the screen. The cursor blinked, waiting for him to act. Daniel thought of Myra again, imagining the look on her face if the company erupted into chaos. If Aaron was ruined and the ripple effects reached everyone they cared about, could he live with the guilt? Could he face her and say, "I chose revenge," knowing the full cost? The thought of her disappointment, her loss of trust, was almost unbearable. As dawn approached, Daniel's mind became clearer. The anger, the desire for revenge, the meticulous planning, they were all masks for something deeper. A need to reclaim control, a need to prove his own worth after being blindsided. But he realized that control gained through destruction was fragile and hollow. The satisfaction of revenge was temporary. The moral weight would last far longer. He understood then that the true battle was within himself, not against Aaron. Slowly, deliberately, Daniel closed the email draft. The file didn't vanish from his computer, but the immediate temptation to strike was gone. He leaned back and let himself breathe, feeling the tension ease slightly. Choosing not to act didn't erase the betrayal, but it allowed him to reclaim something more valuable: his sense of self, his clarity, and the ability to make choices without being consumed by anger. Daniel knew the fight wasn't over. He would still need to protect his position, rebuild his influence, and ensure his future. But he would do it on his own terms. The months of planning, observation, and reflection had not been wasted. They had honed his judgment, strengthened his resolve, and allowed him to understand the true consequences of his actions. He could move forward without destroying someone else, without becoming the person he feared he might become. In the quiet of the office, With the first light of morning creeping in, Daniel made a decision that would define him. He would take the high road. He would act with strategy and integrity, not out of vengeance. The anger remained, a memory etched deep, but it no longer dictated his choices. He would reclaim his life not by hurting Aaron, but by rising above the betrayal, by proving to himself that he could triumph without destroying what he valued most. He turned off the laptop and stood, feeling a strange sense of relief. The act of not acting, the deliberate restraint, felt more powerful than any revenge could have. It was a quiet victory, invisible to the world, but monumental in its impact. Daniel understood that revenge is seductive because it promises satisfaction. But true strength lies in choosing restraint, in refusing to let betrayal dictate the course of one's life. As he walked to the window and looked out at the awakening city, Daniel felt the weight in his chest lift slightly. The storm of anger had passed, leaving clarity in its wake. He knew the journey ahead would be challenging, full of hard decisions and careful steps, but he also knew he was ready. The betrayal would always be part of his story, but it would not define him. He had taken back control, not through destruction, but through deliberate choice, through wisdom, and through the courage to resist the easy path. The city stirred below, indifferent to his personal victories, and Daniel smiled faintly. The silence of the office, the glow of the early morning, the knowledge that he had chosen integrity over rage was a quiet, unshakable triumph. He had faced the pinnacle of his internal conflict and emerged whole, tempered, and stronger. The path forward would be hard, but it would be his own. And in that quiet moment, Daniel understood the ultimate lesson. Revenge can never truly satisfy, but mastery over oneself, the courage to act wisely rather than impulsively, and the strength to rise above betrayal that was a victory no one could take away.